changed their use and potentially changed, made some additions or something to facilitate one of these businesses, would that then affect potentially the value and the assessment of a property, a neighboring property that was not, because the overall assessment of the neighborhood, that zone has now been increased?
No, again, so you're evaluated on the assessment of the use of your lot.
Just your lot?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Anyone else? Any questions for planning? All right, I'd like to open it up to the members of the board. Any concerns, any questions? I'll jump in first if you're kind of hesitant. I was particularly curious what the Gorham Village Alliance position would be on this. Kathy Garrard has noted that they're completely in favor of it, so that was important for me. She's been a member of that for a very long time and helped to drive some beautification in the village area. So I was happy to see her response, or the Gorham Village Alliance response. That's my comment. Anyone else?
I was slightly concerned about the possible impact for fees, but I think that was justified right now.
I'm sorry, was your question answered?
Increase to taxes, that sort of thing, yes, my question was addressed.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
I'm ready to make a motion, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Colonel. Please. Page 7 are two proposed motions.
I move to send the proposed zoning map amendment for rezone along Preble Street to Office Residential District to the Town Council with the recommendation for adoption.
David Burrows, I second.
Thank you, Colonel. Thank you, Mr. Burrows. Any other discussion? We have our map. It's colorized. Hopefully it's in blue. Any other comments or questions? All those in favor? Anyone opposed? Thank you. Okay, keeping up?
Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we are at item 3. I hope this is a public hearing. Land Use and Development Code Amendment. Mobile vending unit exemption, proposed amendment to the Land Use and Development Code that would allow mobile vending unit exemptions for agritourism events. I'd like to hear from planning, please.
Yeah, good evening, Planning Board Chair and Planning Board members. Really, this is a pretty easy land use code amendment. So in our land use code, we have a mobile vending unit standards under Chapter 2. There are certain exemptions under it. Currently, we do not have a kind of mobile vending units at agritourism as being an exempt activity. So agritourism is only allowed in the rural district on active farms. So we were trying to give flexibility to farms to have more uses or events to support the farm use. So it's clear that there are a couple agricultural businesses in town that would like to have a food truck. One of them is Orchard Ridge, as maybe apple picking and having a food truck. So it's not clear. This would just make it crystal clear that if you're operating under the agritourism ordinance, you are exempt from getting a license for food trucks. And I can just quickly speak, we added mobile vending units allowed in the industrial and certain commercial areas that a food truck can locate there over time. That's what that ordinance is for. This is just an exemption for that agritourism event. And I'd answer any questions the board has.
Thank you, Mr. Poirier. Any questions? Yes, please, Ms. Nichols.
Under C, under Land Use and Development Code Amendments, it mentions at the very end of that each property would be limited to only one time annually.
Yeah, that's like any residential property can have a food truck. Maybe you have a birthday party or you had a wedding once a year, you can have a food truck. We just gave a one-time exemption. Or a business having a grand opening can have food trucks. You don't need this.
That's separate from agritourism.
That's agritourism. We're thinking they're going to have multiple events a year for food trucks.
All right, so that was my question. That sounded to me like we were limiting that agritourism to once a year.
No, that's a separate section.
Okay. Thank
And David Burrows, just to kind of clarify this, I think what Tom's explaining is C is any property, not just the agritourism properties.
Correct.
Any additional property.
So it was just clarifying by putting that piece in
Yeah.
there too.
Ladies and gents, this is a public hearing. If you don't mind, I'll open it up for the public hearing. Ladies and gentlemen, if anyone would like to speak to this issue, please approach the podium, state your name and address for the record.
Mr. Chair, I'll have to, just a point of order there. This was not advertised as a public hearing. It's actually a discussion. There were some wires crossed. My apologies on that. So in order to fully comply with the process, we would have to have a public hearing on this next meeting. So just want to make sure that's clear.
Strike two.
Yes, indeed.
So item 3 is not a public hearing, it is a discussion.
It is a discussion. Yes.
I'm grateful no one approached the podium. Yeah.
Yes. So as far as the wording on the proposed motions, there's an edit there that, because
If we get to that point.
we haven't had, yes, if you'd like to make that motion, we need to have a public hearing before it goes to the town council.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question. Raise my own hand. So item 3, each property is limited to 1 day exemption per calendar year. If you're blessed perhaps to have 2 children with different birth dates,
Do I think if a property has 2 events and no one complains, the town's not gonna know about it? Really, that's for repeat offenders that are doing it like 8, 10 times. I mean, you don't get a license, it's basically you have an event. It's more of, do I know if a property has 2 or 3 or 5? Without someone complaining, I won't. So really, there's no license, there's no requirement for that. So if you have 2 kids, when you have 2 events, as long as you're good with your neighbors, the town's not gonna know about it, so. But it's not allowed, if that's what you're asking.
it's 1. So are we,
Right.
Ms. Nichols, Colonel Benson, I was curious about that 1 day. I mean,
That's what it currently is, we're not changing that, that's in the language currently.
okay,
That is, the only part that we're adding is that B. C is already existing.
underlined. Yes, thank you. Colonel?
So the other question then on 2, in that under C, it says the use of mobile vending units is limited to an event for which a mass gathering permit has been issued. If I was having a birthday party for my son, I would normally not get a mass gathering permit. But under this C, it seems like that is all tied together, and the only way I would have it be able to have a mobile vending unit is if I had a mass gathering permit. So that's confusing to me.
Yeah, that's how it's currently drafted.
Yeah, it's
As drafted
confusing.
by the-
I think it needs to be adjusted. And that's just my view on it, but I find the wording confusing.
I think we're in agreement that we think it needs to be tweaked perhaps, and we have a motion that would allow us to go backwards to our,
Correct, you could make the recommendation to the council and see what they would be willing to do. The planning board could do that. There's 2 things you can do. You can move mobile vending units. If you have no issue with B, move that forward and then come back and tweak item C and make that recommendation.
Because C is existing, we're only supposed to be talking about B.
Yeah, I mean, but I think if you have concerns with it, I think absolutely we can identify it for a future, item for the council to address. I mean, if you don't have a problem with B, we can move that forward, and then C. So really, it's the mass gathering. We could propose to strike out number 2 and just have 1 and 3, which would be the new number 2.
sounds good to me. I have no clue about the wording of a proposed motion.
Yeah, because we have to table for
Public
public hearing anyway.
Yeah. I would just say, look to table the item to the next available planning board meeting for public hearing, and have staff look at providing recommendations for item C2 as part of that next public hearing.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I move to table the proposed land use and development code amendment to the town, to our next planning board meeting with potential of looking at revisions to paragraph C. the
Right.
ordinance as well.
Perfect. We have it on film, and you got that. Thank you, Colonel. Is there a second?
I'll second
Thank you,
that.
Ms. Nichols. Any other concerns, questions? It'll be coming back to us with hopefully some revisions, and we'll have more input on that. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Thanks for your patience with this. As I mentioned earlier, item 4 has been removed. Item 5, I look to my right. Is this still a discussion?
Yes, this is a discussion. Yes.
It's just having some fun.
Preliminary subdivision plan review, yes.
So item 5 is a discussion, preliminary subdivision plan, 79 Day Road subdivision, a request for approval to divide a parcel split by previous landowner without sale lots 1 and 2, map 23, lot 7, zoned urban residential expansion. The applicant is represented by Andrew Morrow, PH2A.
Good evening, Andy Morrell from BH2M. Also with me is the applicant. So the applicant owns a 16-acre parcel off of Day Road, 79 Day Road. Parcel is currently zoned urban expansion. So this is an interesting parcel. There were 2 parcels cut out of this previously by the previous owner on the western end of the parcel. Those were cut out in December of 2022. The applicant is looking to cut out 2 additional lots on the eastern portions of the lot. First question you may ask, why is a subdivision triggered? Well, it's because the number of lots that have been cut out within the last 5 years. Lots will be served by overhead electric, drilled wells, and subsurface wastewater disposal. There is some site distance along Day Road that could be problematic for these lots. So what we did is there's an existing curb cut at the top of a hill, kind of between what's proposed Lot 1 and Lot 2. That is the location where the site distance is very good. The only spot that it's really good in this location, so we've proposed a driveway in that location, have a shared driveway for these 2 lots. That's why you see an easement on Lot 1 to serve Lot 2. The applicant is requesting 2 waivers, one for a nitrate analysis. If you look at our plan, the subsurface wastewater disposal systems will flow to the rear of the parcel, to the remaining land of the applicant. We do not anticipate any impacts to any of the abutting parcels to either the east or across Day Road. There are also not houses on those lots. So that's why we're requesting the nitrate analysis waiver. The other waiver is for high-intensity soils. As you can see on the plan, on sheet 1, we've spelled out the density of the parcel. This parcel can support 7 lots. The applicant is proposing 2. Mark Hampton Associates did wetlands for the parcel as part of the density requirements. If we were to do high-intensity soils for the parcel, it would be used to further this density requirement, this density calculation. I spoke to Mark Hampton today. He said that he has not done a high-intensity soil survey, but he said that he's done test pits on the site, he's done wetlands, so he's done a lot of work on the parcel, and he said there would be no poorly draining soils outside of the wetlands. So there would be no additional deductions needed from our density requirements if a high-intensity soil survey is done. So we're asking the board to consider waiving the requirement for the high-intensity soil survey because we don't think it's necessary in this case. We did receive town comments last week. I think you can all see they're pretty minor in nature, and we all know this is a 2-step process: preliminary subdivision approval and then a final approval. We'll certainly have all these items wrapped up when we come back to you for final subdivision approval. A few of the items that were mentioned in the comments, one was financial capacity. As the board knows, there's really no site improvements on this parcel. They're just cutting out 2 lots. The applicant intends to sell the lots. There's no road. Typically, in this case, we'll do a performance guarantee for the driveway apron, but the driveway aprons already exist in this case. The applicant can certainly provide financial capacity if it's something the board's going to require, but in this case, I'm not sure it's necessary. Water calculations, again, we're happy to provide those. Water is almost 6,000 linear feet away from this project. I think we all know how those numbers are going to turn out, 6,000 feet of a water extension for 2 lots. So I'm happy to provide those if the board needs those, but I think we all know how those are going to come out. So yeah, with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll throw it back to you. The applicant was hopeful that we would be considered for preliminary tonight, and then our intention would be to wrap up these kind of final items and come back to you at a future meeting for final approval. So thank you. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Morrow. Ladies and gentlemen, any questions of the applicant or the engineer?
David Burrows, just a curiosity, will the existing house and barn remain, and the owner will keep those in place and live in them?
Yes, the applicant currently resides on that parcel in the old farm, yes, and I don't believe they're proposing any improvements to the farm as part of this project, no.
Okay, thanks. Answer my question.
Yep.
Mr. Chair, I have a couple of staff comments I could share if
Please.
that's in order. Thank you. I think Mr. Morrow covered most of the items. I did want to flag that one of the waivers that they've requested is not allowed in the ordinance, the waiver from the Class A soil survey, unless public water is provided. There's basically 2 ways to get around that waiver. You could be in a certain zone, which doesn't require net residential acreage calculations. This zone does require that. So the only other way around that for them to be eligible for that waiver would be to provide public water. So I wanted to make sure I flagged that for the board, that they can request that waiver, but it's not allowed under the ordinance. I think that is the main thing that we wanted to flag. Some other things, the ordinance does require underground electric in all zones for subdivisions. And sidewalks are required. There's an opportunity under the ordinance for an in lieu fee, which is based on the number of units. It would be a modest fee with 2 units of housing. So just something to flag as well.
Damon, could you clarify, when is that fee required to be paid? Is that when a building permit is pulled? Is that how that process works?
I'll have to go back and look at the ordinance. I can't remember if we tied it to subdivision or building permit. My guess is it's more tied to subdivision approval. As part of your approval process, we'll probably do it as part of your approval and a requirement before you move to pre-con.
Okay.
I have some questions for staff, please. And please correct me if I'm wrong. I travel with Day Road frequently, and there are no sidewalks. So we're not going to have a sidewalk for 2 lots, are we?
No, so that's the reason we have the in lieu fee. So basically, this area is a growth area, so we're starting as this, like the golf course, and these areas that are going to be highly developed, there's going to be a fee paid that the town will then collect enough fees, and then with town fees, do a sidewalk project along a road. Because really, if you think about it, a lot of these roads are open ditch drainage, and a lot of the cost regarding sidewalks is closing the drainage. So as these growth areas develop, South Gorham being one of them, you're going to have to consider sidewalks as part of a dense development. So identifying that we're not currently there, so having some mechanism to collect some money that we would then do smart sidewalk planning. That's why we did the pedestrian, if the planning board remembers, we did the pedestrian overlay district, identify those areas in town that would require a sidewalk, this being one of them.
So that was going to be my question. This area falls inside that district?
Correct.
We can post Gorham Police Department because this road is a speed trap. It's crazy. Mr. Morrow, if I would please, so we're going to dedicate 50-foot driveway access easement for the benefit of Lot 2. Is that because we're two ends against the middle? We got that high hill on the west side as we come down, and then we have Hart's Way? So is that, perhaps, Mr. Norton, is that why it's not quite subdividing both lots, it's more on Lot 1?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman. So as Andy had mentioned, there's an existing curb cut along Day Road in
Yeah.
that location. So as opposed to recreating or putting a new curb cut along Day Road, they'll just utilize the existing and then grant that easement for the second parcel. And
Personally,
that location is where staff worked with Mr. Morrow on locating and maximizing the site distance.
And you're okay with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, thank you. As I say, I drive this not quite 2 times a day, but it's crazy. It's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yep.
Beautiful area.
It
Beautiful
is.
area, a lot of deer.
Yep.
Et cetera, et cetera. I digress. Anyone else? Either staff or committee? Yes, please, Mrs. Nichols.
I had a question in that it looked to me, and I can't find exactly where on which map, unless I was on Google Earth, that there's a stream that
Yeah.
goes behind those.
There is, yeah.
And that, I guess I was concerned about doing the not doing soil testing if there was a stream that goes back in there, but it sounds like the soil testing has to be done, because, and,
There's a stream that runs through here.
okay, all right, that's not the way if I can I
Yes, you can.
with that question?
Sure thing.
So, and this may not be directly just for your project there, but as this being a growth area, and so the intention is, we're anticipating that there's gonna be more homes built there. Does that infrastructure, so did I also hear that the electric has to be underground? So we're already beginning that process of, from the ground up, of trying to get that growth area where we want it to be, with underground electric, with sidewalks. Because I guess where I'm going with that is that I see like there's 2 lots and then there's another 2 lots. And if we only look at 2 lots at a time, are we missing things because we're only looking at those small pieces? But it sounds like there is a much bigger picture that you guys are seeing, and I just want to clarify that and make.
Yeah, so the overlying comp plan sets growth areas and identifies the overall parameters. The planning board is only allowed to look at what's being proposed by the developer. So at this point, they're proposing 2 lots, so we've got to look at 2 lots as being and meeting the requirements of that district, as well as, is it overly consistent with the comp plan? So that's what you're looking at. So you can't look at the whole parcel and say, we're gonna look at this whole thing being subdivided, because they're only coming forward with the 2 lots and then the existing lots. So that's what you're required to review.
Anyone else? Any questions? For me personally, I'm looking at a lot of yellow on page 8, page 9, page 10, page 11, things that have not been done yet. Gives me a little bit of concern. If anyone else shares those same sentiments, if you've had a chance to review them. Again, this is preliminary review.
Well, for me, the big one was the 2 were the soil study, which apparently cannot be waived, so it sounds like that's gonna have to go forward. And then, I don't know what the requirement is for the financial. It doesn't seem like there's any improvements going on the property. They're just subdividing it, so it doesn't seem like there's I don't understand the requirement for having to show financial capabilities for this project. I don't see how that applies. So if the staff can give me an example or provide some clarification, but it doesn't seem like there's any improvement costs, so how that comes into play.
So I know the board has done a couple of things in the past regarding, so that financial capacity requirement is identified in the state law, so that's, we kind of identify what the requirement is. So I think in the past, the planning board has done a couple of things. One is get a kind of generic letter from a financial institution that kind of just gives the planning board, kind of identifies that the applicant has, we looked at the plan and we find our applicant has the ability to provide the financial capacity. So that's one option, is just a generic letter from a financial institution. The other is if the planning board wants to look at it and say, due to the low cost of the improvements proposed on the plans, we find that financial capacity, the applicant will meet the financial capacity, and done it that way too. Sometimes when they have done that is they require some kind of identification of a bank account that provides a certain number, but that's up to the planning board.
Good.
Yeah, I don't know what the way ahead is for that. Then I guess we have to have a conversation about that as a board. I guess I would expect that the staff would make a recommendation on what's the best way forward on this specifically, so we have something to talk about.
I do believe recently we had another application that did have to provide that a financial institution certified, whether they bonded or whatever, that they had the financial capacity. I just remember that recently, but to this point here as well.
Yeah, typically, if there are improvements like a private way and we require that next step, that they actually have the letter of credit and the bank's looked at it and is more serious about being able to fund that, because we don't release the subdivision plan until we have that. This is a little bit different. So I guess maybe I'll look to Mr. Morrell to say, is it you have the ability to do one of those get one of those generic letters from a financial institution?
Yeah, we can take care of that.
Thank you. I'm looking to planning, perhaps Mr. Norton. Can you give me some guidance on a nitrate plume analysis? Why we do or why we don't? If you're not familiar with it, that's fine.
I'll let Tom answer this one, as not being super familiar with that
Thank you.
nitrate analysis.
Didn't mean to put you on the spot.
No, it's fine.
So nitrate plume analysis is typically required by the planning board, is to identify where wells can be located in subdivisions, especially with numerous lots. Typically, especially suburban residential or rural districts and clustered subdivisions, to ensure that wells are being located on these lots that don't have nitrate plume impacts, right? So it identifies a plan that shows, typically we see, if you have a 10 or 15 lot subdivision, sometimes those abilities to locate wells on those lots, depending on where septic systems will go, is very tight. So identifying for those future homeowners where their wells should be and identify a location, that's why it's needed now. The planning board in the past has provided basically waivers to those nitrate plume analysis if they're basically larger larger lots, and there will not be the potential to have impacted wells. So I think that's really the threshold the board should be looking at, is, are these lots subject enough or big enough that you feel comfortable that wherever the septic is located, a well in each lot can be located at a distance that will not provide impacts for nitrate plumes. So really that's what the board looks for.
The other thing the board is looking at is, does it impact any abutting lots that exist currently? Are there existing wells in the area that could be impacted by our proposed septic systems? And in this case, there aren't any. Our nitrates are going to be flowing to the back of our lots and the remaining land of the applicant, and not flowing towards one of these abutting lots. So the other reason we asked for a waiver, so.
Thank you. I believe there's a particular radius that we need to be between wells, correct?
Well, not wells from the septic system. It's 100 feet from a septic system. It's not, there's no separation requirement for wells, because we have heard from abutters that someone had a good well and then drilled a well right next to their well and then impacted it. So, but there's no separation for drilling wells next to each other.
No, not for wells, just for something. I'm
Just-
aware of that. Jacqueline Lorenzen, the well, nowhere near the well nor the Septic?
I don't believe there's a house on that parcel currently.
Already. I've said my piece. Anyone else? Ms. Nichols, please.
And I apologize, my learning curve is at your expense a little bit. But post-construction stormwater maintenance, what is that? Is that just all no's and NA's? Is that because,
That's something we take a look at for subdivision review, and again, larger subdivisions have requirements of ponds or structures, or outflow structures, or level spreaders that we have to take a look at and make sure that post-construction they're handled correctly. And usually that's identifying and creating a road association that has to maintain those facilities. This being two individual lots, even though it's going through this process, they wouldn't be subject to any of that stormwater facility.
okay, what was flagging for me is the erosion, that there's no erosion control, but because it's a small enough project, there's not a need for having that erosion control.
Correct. Usually if there's a private road or a public road being built, that site would need erosion control measures during that construction. Here, there's no on-site improvements proposed other than the house lots themselves, so that erosion sedimentation control would not be necessary.
But I will clarify, erosion control will be necessary as part of the house construction
Correct.
in the driveway. So that will be handled. What are you saying about this separate?
But right now, we're taking, this is the lot, and then when the construction starts, there's a whole nother process that has to go
Correct.
through. Okay, thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, on page 3, there is a suggested waiver language if we feel that a nitrate plume analysis is not required based on the discussion review by Mr. Morrow. Would anyone like to consider that after hearing the explanation?
And again, for the staff, this waiver, the staff is in support of this waiver? For the nitrate plume analysis?
I haven't reviewed or had the ability to provide a recommendation one way or the other. We could ask our peer review engineer to provide a recommendation to the planning board if the board wishes to have that as part of the waiver request.
Yeah, I will say the peer review engineer didn't raise any objections to it, and none of the staff raised any objections to it. And we did look to make sure that the waiver would be in order as per the ordinance, and it appears that it is allowed. You're allowed to issue this waiver per the ordinance. So it's up to the board to determine that. And as Mr. Poirier said, we could, of course, look for
Sure,
more information for you.
Sure. Anyone?
Favor.
Motion.
All right, I'm going to move on. We don't want to touch that. That's the sentiment?
A waiver?
I'm sorry?
Are we asking about the waiver?
Yes.
Yeah.
This is specific to the nitrate plume analysis.
We're not going to touch that. Is that the consensus?
By not touch it, you mean
We're not going
approve
to
it?
discuss it. We're not going to grant the waiver. We're not going to vote.
Until we get a little more clarification from, an actual real clarification or feedback from staff.
Sure, sure. So can we add that in there?
Oh, let's see on here.
Anyone else? On page 12, there are 12 items as well as 3 additional items on page 13, which are conditions of approval. I hope you're somewhat familiar with them. And then on page 13, there are two motions proposed.
So, question, yeah.
Colonel, yes, please.
So if we went ahead and approved the preliminary subdivision, which I would like to do, but we've got now this issue, I understand the conditions, but we now have this issue of the waivers that we haven't taken action on. So do those become conditions that need to be addressed before the approval is contingent upon those waivers being met, or those requirements being met? Or do we need to table this until we make a decision on the waivers or the requirements met by the applicant?
So the high-intensity soil survey has to be completed, so I guess I looked at Mr. Morrell. Will you still be moving forward with a nitrate plume waiver, or do you want to just do the nitrate plume just to get that off the table to possibly not get final subdivision approval should the board not waive it?
Yeah, so the risk we would run is, say we get preliminary this evening and we come back at the next meeting and the board isn't willing to waive the nitrate analysis and we don't have it, then we come back for a third meeting.
I'm trying to avoid that.
I guess that's up to the applicant on whether he's willing to move forward with the nitrate analysis. I'll talk to him after the meeting and find out if you know, what the costs are to do that, and if we're gonna go forward with that, but,
I think I heard consensus here among the board. If you want to have a little quick conversation right now, I mean, we're not trying to hold anything up, but we need the tune from Jeopardy.
So the nitrate, we wouldn't get this information once we know what kind of structure is going to go on the property. That wouldn't be a requirement.
No, what typically happens is they get the passing location for a septic system. So then they'll put, basically what shows is a little septic system box on the lot with a septic system, and then it'll show where the plume is going.
Right.
And then you have what you call your well exclusion area, where you can't locate a well.
Right.
In the location. So that's typically what you see as part of it. So again, it's typically done where the board doesn't, it's the board's comfort level on the lot size and being able to locate septic systems on lots and not impact each other's wells. And then as Mr. Morrell said, basically abutting parcels too. So kind of both.
Right, and it seems to me like just from looking at the size of the lots that would be feasible, but without knowing what the plans are, it's feasible, but not. It's just hard for me to know that. So,
Correct.
Which is why
I will point out to the board, there was 2 projects just down the street from this that were done that the nitrate studies were waived as part of those improvements. So just to point that out.
Different board.
Correct.
And possibly different size lots.
They're huge. Gilbert Homes, you're talking about those 2 lots?
No, I'm talking about the ones for Jack Riley and Lindsay Hastings down the street that this board just approved within the last, I don't know, year.
I'm not sure which end of Day Road they're on. I'm sorry.
They're on the Brackett Road. Brackett Road, end of Day Road.
How many years ago was that? I mean,
What's that?
how many years ago was that?
Oh, just last year.
Yeah. I mean, each project is its own project of the board.
Sure.
yeah, I would like to find a way to move this forward myself.
So I talked to the applicant. The applicant is gonna, regardless of the results of this evening, is gonna continue to try to seek the nitrate waiver. We'll see what peer review has to say and come back to you guys and see what your decision is.
May I ask just a clarification? So the request, what you're seeking tonight is approval to split those two lots off. And then after that, there's also a request for the waiver. Can we approve the splitting of the lots if we're all in agreement of that?
So this is a preliminary approval, so there's still a final approval, so this is basically the first step. The next step is to finalize the approval, make the changes that are necessary, provide the other information. So the board, we talked about a little bit at the workshop tonight. So if the board finds that these plans are around 90% there for subdivision review and approval, really that's typically the threshold to grant preliminary approval. Now, if the board doesn't think you're at 90% review and approval for the plans, then you may want to either hold off preliminary review and approval until they get there. So it's really the board's comfort level that where they're at, you feel they're at 90%, and then grant final approval conditioned on meeting the few outstanding items. That's typically done, and then completing of the legal documents.
And Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the board has the authority to grant preliminary approval and leave the waiver for the final approval step.
Yeah, if they feel like that waiver doesn't meet that need to be in that 90%, they can grant that preliminary approval and hold off on the waiver.
Yep.
Thank you. Members of the board?
Sounds like if we can wait until final approval to see the results of the staff's review, then we can decide then whether the waiver makes sense.
Does that include approving the subdivision of
Yes,
those
that-
two lots off? So we can approve.
That would be, we would be approving everything on the condition that the review of the nitrate plume analysis waiver is in the applicant's favor.
Correct, and then the applicant will be doing his high-intensity soil survey to submit that as part of his final review and approval. So that will be submitted to the board as part of final.
Does that part need to be in the motion? Because we know they cannot we cannot waive the soil testing. So do we still need to address that in the motion because it was in the proposal?
What I would probably do is have you, since he requested the waiver, is basically take up the waiver request and really, you can't approve it, so vote it down, and then you'll have that one outstanding waiver to address as part of final.
Okay. All right, somebody come up with a motion. A motion.
Looking to my left, anyone? Questions, comments?
I'm questioning, making sure that all the items that are highlighted in yellow are going to be addressed with this application.
They will be, yes. When we come back for final approval, I'll have a letter that lists the comment that was made and how we addressed it. So I'll spell all that out for you guys.
Thank you.
And just to help the board too, so that letter that we would get would be reviewed by the peer review engineer and staff as well. So that's kind of the process to make sure the items that are flagged have been addressed or have not been, depending.
Okay, thanks, Dana.
Is that a little more of a comfort level?
Yeah, I don't like voting on things we know we're not going to pass, but that's the correct order of things. I defer to staff recommendation and the board's experience. If you do this regularly?
I would say that since this is preliminary, we still have a chance to turn it down on final, and we just need to make sure we're paying attention when that comes along.
Well, I understand they're asking us to turn it down now, the specific waiver on the soil test.
High-intensity soil survey.
Right.
You can't grant it, so my recommendation is they request it, you do the motion and vote to
Okay.
deny it.
So,
You can vote on that as an individual item.
Correct.
Does that make sense? So it's clearly stated in the minutes.
Right, but I don't want to move to grant a waiver because I don't want to grant the waiver, but that's the way that I have to,
No?
I can't make a motion not to pass something. Because then I wouldn't, why would I make the motion in the first place? Sorry, I'm just trying to get this point of order correct.
So you're reacting to a request by the applicant.
Right.
If you don't address it, then it's like the board never took up the item.
Right.
So it's a request by the applicant, even though you can't grant it, it's been requested, so you.
I'm just
so
looking for the right
yeah.
language because I don't want to say, I make a motion to grant a waiver when I don't
You
support granting
can
a
do
waiver.
it in the negative, I don't recommend that, but you can do the motion to say recommend not approving the waiver request, but then it's a negative and it gets complicated, so we always recommend the waiver in the positive and then it's just voted down.
Voted down. Yeah.
I move to grant a waiver to the Aliamore Carmen Schneider for requirement for a high-intensity soil survey.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Ms. Nichols. Any discussion? Everyone understand what we're trying to do?
I do now.
I plan to vote in the negative.
As do I. Anyone else? Anyone else? Any?
Let's vote.
All those in favor? All those against? Anyone opposed? Thank you. So that was unanimous.
Thank you. Just one point of order. Who was the second on that one? Just to make sure we.
I did. Nichols,
Ms.
I'm
Nichols.
sorry, I should have
Nichols,
said my
sorry.
name. Thank you.
I'm gonna also make a motion to grant preliminary subdivision approval for the 79 Day Road subdivision in the urban residential expansion zone districts based on finding of fact and conditions of approval as written by the town planner to include satisfying the need for the nitrate plume analysis.
That was a little trickier. And I bring that up because I heard the owner is hedging on that. But in our final approval, we can require it.
Yeah, I'm just making that as one of the conditions of approval, so it has to be addressed. If it's not addressed, then when it comes back for final, at least that's how I understood and why I worded it that way.
Correct, yeah. He's correct, so he didn't say, he just wants it addressed, so when you get the submission, there'll be information regarding the waiver request that staff's gonna provide the recommendation from Wright Piers or any concern Wright Piers has with a waiver request, and then the board can act whether to grant that waiver or not.
Yeah, because we haven't voted on the waiver yet. Making it a condition.
Correct.
Can I ask staff a question? Is that appropriate?
Sorry.
Can I ask staff a question? Is that appropriate at this time?
Sure, no one's waiting.
Are you going to be sending this request to Wright Pierce separate of our upcoming submission, or are you going to send it all as one? The reason I ask, I'm wondering from the applicant if we were going to get the response on the nitrate opinion prior to the review of the final subdivision. That could impact whether the applicant chooses, what direction the applicant chooses.
So what staff will probably reach out to Wright Piers to say, one is a high-intensity soil survey needed before they provide a recommendation on whether they have any concerns with a nitrate plume analysis. If Wright Piers says they want to see the high-intensity soil survey, then we'll have to wait for your resubmission. If they find comfortable providing kind of any concerns they have with it before that, then we can get that beforehand.
Okay. If you can just let me know how that goes, and that I can relay that to the applicant and they can make a decision. Thank you.
So we had a motion.
We did.
We were able to get that language? We can always have it on video. Is there any chance we can repeat it?
So, motion to grant preliminary subdivision approval for 79 Day Road subdivision located on map 23, lot 7, the urban residential expansion zoning district based on findings of fact and conditions of approval as written by the town planner, amended by the planning board, addressing the request for nitrate plume analysis.
Yeah, to include the nitrate plume analysis.
Okay.
to include a resolution on the nitrate plume analysis.
Okay.
Right, because we don't want to state it, that you're saying they have to do the
Right.
plume
No.
analysis.
No.
You want to make sure that's addressed.
Right.
Maybe evaluation instead of resolution?
We'd like the opinion, right? We'd like peer review opinion. It would prevent, as a,
Or they can do it. I mean, there's several different options, so
correct.
it just has to be resolved.
So to include resolution of nitrate plume analysis requirement. Okay.
Yep.
Is there a second on that motion?
I'll second that. Barbara
Nichols?
Nichols.
Motion Benson, second Nichols. Any other discussion? Everyone up to speed on where we are? All those in favor? Anyone opposed? It's unanimous. Thanks for your patience.
Thank you. Enjoy your evening.
Item 6, removed just prior to this meeting. Is there any other business to come before us this evening? Yes, Colonel, please.
Chairman, I just wanted to state for the rest of the planning board and anyone who's watching that we did have our first meeting of the Fiscal Sustainability Committee for the town. So that included town planner, the superintendent of schools, several members of the public who volunteered to serve, myself, and some other members of the school administration as well. And the intent is to lay out a pathway or a framework for the town's financial sustainability going forward. And we've scheduled meetings for the next 12 months, and I'm the representative of the planning board that's sitting on that committee. And so I'll periodically will provide updates to the committee at the meetings.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other business? I would entertain a motion.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second?
Any discussion or reason why? Why not? All those in favor?
That was-
Unanimous. Anyone opposed? Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you to staff. And thank you to Ben Dyke for filming us. Good evening.
Eight.